So welcome back to my solo-sodes here at Victory Mental. It's good to be back for episode number 2. And it's fantastic to be able to have a platform where I get to take 15 minutes to half an hour to answer a single question. This is a skill that isn't really applicable to that many areas of life except for these solo podcasts. So I am glad that I have an avenue to be able to utilize these long-form responses to questions that I think are very interesting to get into the weeds a little bit. So today's topic is the timeline for TRT, and the question that comes up all the time, it would be one of the most frequently asked questions, and for good reason, which is simply, how long does TRT take to work? How long does it take for me to get the results that I am hoping to achieve from my treatment? And as you may have anticipated from the prelude, it might not be that straightforward as being a simple answer, but we will do our best. So this is a multifactorial response to give, and the first place to start with breaking this question down is looking at someone's expectations, because how long does TRT take to work comes with a very good follow-up question, which is, well, what exactly do you expect it to do? What does TRT working really mean? Are we looking for a subjective response? Are we looking for an objective improvement in the disease states which are often caused by or built upon a foundation of hypogonadism? Are we looking for someone to have a restoration of a teenager's fixation on libido? Are we looking for a muscle and gym response akin to a cycle of anabolic steroids? Or are we looking for a more realistic and accurate response to TRT, which is feeling the way a man is supposed to feel based on his inputs and his outputs? And the number one foundation that we have to look at from an expectation management response to TRT is a timeline, because this isn't an overnight treatment. I wish it was. I wish you could just take your first dose of testosterone and then everything is solved. It would make my job easier. It would make everyone's jobs a whole lot easier, but it's not. And the reason for that is that the primary benefits of TRT come from prolonged exposure to stable androgens. A good example is puberty. Puberty takes years. If a 13-year-old boy walked up to his mum and dad and said, "Why aren't I a full-grown man yet?" he'd be saying, "Well, son, that's because puberty takes time." TRT takes time. And I think sometimes adults are maybe even more impatient than children. TRT takes time to work. And a secondary point to that, which is often not discussed, is that it also takes time to do the work on TRT. And I'd like to explain what that means a little bit further. See, when someone is hypogonadal for a prolonged period of time, they often don't feel so good. And this is due to physiological leading to psychological stress. When you feel terrible, you can't really look after yourself very well. And humans are pretty good at self-medicating in ways that might not be conducive to optimal long-term health. Drugs, alcohol, junk food, hedonism, instant reward gratification, all of these things can often become creature comforts, indulgences that maybe get a little bit out of hand when your baseline state feels terrible anyway. You know, what's the point in eating well and training hard and looking after yourself perfectly if you're not getting the results? We are creatures of habit, and creatures of habit are driven by the inputs and outputs we receive based on the efforts that we do. Why do the work if you don't get the reward? So when you're used to not getting the reward and you're used to feeling like crap no matter what you do, it makes sense why people can come a bit more predisposed towards developing bad habits, which in essence are maladaptive coping mechanisms. And I believe that there are two maybe slightly esoteric reasons why people go on TRT, whether they realize or not. It's because they want to be more manly, and you know what that means can kind of differ person to person. But I think ultimately we're all trying to subjectively improve our experience of being alive. I think that's what it all boils down to. Number one leads to number two. When it comes to being more of a man, when it comes to having a better quality of life on TRT, it can sometimes be disappointing. It can sometimes be a bit jarring when you get 12 weeks, 16 weeks into your treatment, and you kind of realize that you don't feel that much better than you felt before. And then your doctor or your provider looks at your blood work and they go, yep, everything looks great. And you're going, well, that doesn't make much sense because, my testosterone levels are 3 times, 4 times higher than they were before, but I kind of feel much the same as I used to. And I understand where this expectation comes from. This to me makes a lot of sense because with every other compound that we would look at putting in the body, medications, stimulants, pre-workouts, things that people might be used to using, you get the maximal effect when the medication or substance reaches the peak in the blood. If you're drinking coffee every day for 12 weeks, you're not going to get the maximal effects of caffeine after 12 weeks. You're going to probably get it the first day you have the coffee about 45 minutes after you drink the thing. So why don't we get that with testosterone? And it's because hormones work differently in the body. And what we're trying to achieve isn't due to directly the acute effects of testosterone. It's due to the prolonged saturation effects of androgens. But secondarily, it's also due to the trajectory changes and outcomes of living as a higher testosterone man. Because a lot of what we're trying to achieve, unfortunately, for some people, and this can be a bit of a wake-up call in terms of expectations, is that a lot of what we're hoping to achieve from TRT comes from the work that we're now capable to do as healthier, more resilient men. I don't think testosterone itself turns you into a man who is capable of leadership. I think it gives you the foundational biological traits to build them, but it will not turn you into a confident, resilient, courageous, well-built, healthy man just from having the serum testosterone levels. And there's a really important component of this, and it's because levels on TRT are given, they're not earned. See, if a healthy man who can produce androgens himself is to achieve optimal healthy androgen levels, he has to look after himself a certain way to achieve that. He can't achieve that by being an inactive couch potato living off beer and McDonald's. He has to do that by putting in the work to make his body function the way it was intended and thrive. This comes from good diet, good sleep, sun exposure, exercise, all of these habits and processes consistently. And to actually undertake these things consistently over time, this also requires prolonging gratification, it requires discipline, it requires work ethic, it requires a lot of traits and skills which are also beneficial as part of the journey, not just achieving the outcome. And when we come in and we hijack the system, because the system is broken, we remove the process and we remove the necessity for the process in achieving the reward. And a really key component of testosterone is explaining and teaching to men that they actually have to go back and do all the things that they would be doing if they could be making these levels naturally. Because what happens is if we don't correct the lifestyle and we don't correct the processes and we don't correct the work ethic and we simply give the reward and we give the testosterone level, if the body is out of alignment with the testosterone levels it's going to be receiving, this can actually lead to side effects because now we're creating an environment which is unnatural. The levels are supraphysiological. A healthy level of testosterone for an unhealthy man is by definition supraphysiological. So there is some nuance here. And one thing that I found very interesting in my work with my clinic in Australia, as well as my work with my clinic in the Baltics over here, is that the key differentiating factor between how well a man is doing at the 6-month mark or the 12-month mark, a lot of the time is based on how he's living, not necessarily what dose he's taking. And there is a synergistic effect between the healthy lifestyle habits that a lot of men aren't doing that they need to adopt, whether they like it or not, and the positive outcomes they achieve from hormone replacement therapy. So with all of that said, to put things into a timeline, assuming that this prerequisite is met, I think that testosterone tends to build, firstly, a honeymoon phase. And the honeymoon phase can sometimes be uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be a little bit too good, and guys will chase the dragon. But what happens when you first administer TRT in your timeline of treatment is that your body had no idea that it was about to go from 0 to hero. It had no idea that you were going to be puttering along day to day with hypogonadal testosterone levels, then all of a sudden you were going to jack your testosterone levels up to 3 or 4 times higher. Your body was blind to that decision. So it's very common for men to achieve an acute honeymoon phase. And this can be anywhere from 2 weeks all the way through to 2 to 3 months. And this is where you can either feel overstimulated, maybe a bit jacked up, especially if you're predisposed to anxiety, or you can kind of feel like Superman and feeling a little bit too damn good for a little while is nothing to complain about. But what can often be jarring is when that honeymoon phase wears off and after 2 to 3 months, you as the patient, you go back to your doctor or your provider and you say, it's not working anymore. I felt great for the first few months, but now I'm back to feeling terrible. Now I'm back to feeling exactly how I used to feel before. So that means I need to take more. I understand how that thought process comes about. It's wrong, but I understand the thought process. That's a fair response. You feel a tolerance to it in your mind. And you need to take more to be able to keep that effect going that you had previously. But that's not correct. At that first 12 to 16 weeks, once the honeymoon is worn off, and some men don't even get a honeymoon, I would be hoping that, assuming that you're looking after yourself well, or ideally a little bit better than before you started, that you'd be feeling 10 to, if you're lucky, maybe 20% better than you felt before you started across the board. And sometimes I'll have guys come back to my clinic and they'll go, yeah, this is great, this is great, this is great, this is great, but this area is not quite perfect. And I'm like, you are 12 weeks into a lifelong therapy. 10% improvement should be achieved. Whereas they'll be saying, oh, because I'm only 80% better, I'm not 100% better, there's something wrong. This is unrealistic expectations. And this is why it's so important that providers and doctors really teach their patients from day one what they can realistically expect with the treatment. Because it's very common when patients who don't listen or don't know what they're doing, when they're not achieving the outcomes that they feel like they should be, whether they are correct or not, they will jump on Reddit, they will jump on YouTube, they will jump on Facebook groups. They will ask strangers who have no idea about anything how to fix their quote-unquote problem. And these strangers will provide a quote-unquote solution, which will make everything worse. So expectation management is really important for compliance. And realistic expectations are very important in achieving the outcomes that people are hoping to achieve on TRT, because TRT takes years, not months. Even optimistically, we're looking at months, not weeks. And a lot of the time, people are hoping to achieve what takes months and years in days and weeks. And this simply doesn't happen. 10 to 20% better at your first check-in is a win. Anything has moved in a positive direction that early on, it's a win. It is. It doesn't mean the dose needs to be changed. It doesn't mean there's something wrong. If there's been any improvement at all, 12 to 16 weeks in, that's a win, and anything above that should be celebrated. The next timeline I'd like to look at is about 6 months from starting treatment. And a lot of the time, this is either your first, second, or even third check-in, depending on how your provider's doing things and what's going on. And at this stage, I would hope that all aspects have started to improve. I'm really going to highlight and put in bold the word started to improve. This is not to be confused with all areas have resolved. Started to improve. A lot of the time, it will take up to 6 months for sexual benefits to start to manifest. This means that there may be no improvement in libido or erection function for the first 6 months of treatment. That is okay, because it takes time to heal. Sexual function and libido is downstream of everything. Survival comes first, reproduction comes last in human biology. This is the hierarchy of human needs. So as your body is focusing on survival and then focusing on healing, the signal to reproduce, whether that's the goal of sex or not, this comes last. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how it is. And a lot of people might not like this effect because a lot of the time, the primary reason that they went on TRT in the first place isn't to improve their sex life, but this is the way it is. So I would hope that these areas start to improve at 6 months. And if there's been no activity at all, sometimes this can be to do with metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. It can also be to do with a unchecked and untreated DHEA level, hypothyroidism. And a lot of the time, whether people like to look at it or not, it can also be to do with their poor diet and lifestyle, as well as internal and underlying psychological anxiety or issues in the relationship. And these are some of them, the latter, areas that are well beyond the influence of a few milligrams here or there of testosterone injections or topical cream, if that's the application used. Beyond 6 months, the 6 month to 12-month mark, this is where I'd like to see benefits really starting to ramp up. And it's very common for men to use things like tadalafil for the first 6 to 12 months until the sexual benefits of treatment come to pass. But depending on how far off track someone is and how much work they have to do, how much weight they have to lose, how much they have to reduce their alcohol consumption, how much they have to improve their diet, it could take a little bit longer. Because ultimately, what people are hoping to achieve is a byproduct of being in good health, and restoring androgen levels is only the foundation to build good health. And a lot of the time, people are wanting to subjectively experience the outcome of being the guy who's been doing the work for a while. If from tomorrow you start living meticulously, you start getting up at the same time every day, doing cardio every day, going for 10,000 steps every day, lifting weights regularly, doing stretching and mobility regularly, eating clean food, doing all the things that you probably know that you're supposed to be doing, cutting out all the stuff that you probably know that you shouldn't be doing, things like drinking alcohol regularly, eating too much junk food, laying on the couch when you should be at the gym, all of these kind of things. If you start doing those things tomorrow, today's Thursday, so let's say you start doing it on Friday, you're not going to wake up on Saturday feeling like $1,000,000. You might feel better than how you woke up feeling this morning. I'd hope you did. But if you did those things consistently for 6 months or 12 months, you would feel drastically different when you woke up on a Saturday morning in a year from now. That makes sense. And a lot of the time, people are hoping to achieve that subjective state within a day or two of making these changes. And these changes take time. You have to be the guy who made those changes a while ago, and you have to be a byproduct of the downstream effect of all those changes chronically over time. And testosterone replacement therapy is the same. I think that the majority of the benefits of TRT occur within the first 1 to 2 years. And the minority of the benefits, the later 70, actually let's say the first 70% of the benefits occur within the first 1 to 2 years. And the later 30% occur in the coming years after that. I've been on treatment now for almost a decade. And I can look back and say that every year I have had more benefits of my treatment, both in terms of my mindset, the physical benefits, but also the trajectory of where my life has ended up as a result. And a lot of men who I speak to say the same thing. Once you get your dose right, that's kind of like day one. That's not the end, that's the start of the journey. And the effects of hormones are not, by and large, acute, they're chronic. Chronic hormone dysfunction is what causes the problems. And chronic stable hormone levels are what cause the benefits. So, the first few months, honeymoon period. 10 to 20% benefits, maybe. 6 months, everything should start to improve, but not be resolved, and you should feel a little bit better. This doesn't mean you need to take more testosterone. It doesn't mean that you need to start taking whatever you've read about online. It doesn't mean that you need to start going on Reddit or YouTube and looking for that magic supplement that someone's trying to sell you. It means that you need to put the work in and give your treatment time to work. You need to look after yourself properly. You need to look after yourself the way that you'd look after someone that you love and care about. And that should be yourself. 1 to 2 years is where I think you'll get the majority of the benefits. And the following years after that is when the benefits should continue to trickle through. But the limiting factor for all of this is how well you take care of yourself, how you show up day to day, what your daily habits are like, what you do consistently the majority of the time. Give the treatment time to work, have realistic expectations, and you'll get the results that you are hoping to achieve.